The little girl's footprints vanished into the snow just as Nora picked up the suitcase she had packed to leave. Snow stung Nora's face as she stumbled across the frozen yard, her fingers numb around the handle of her suitcase. The front door banged wildly in the wind behind her. Then Garrett's voice cut through the storm. "Sadie!" A tiny red scarf fluttered from a fence post, and both of them froze. The child was nowhere in sight, and neither of them knew what she had heard the night before. If stories of love, family, and second chances speak to your heart, stay with us for this unforgettable journey. The stagecoach rattled so hard over the rocky road that Nora Hayes had to grip the edge of her seat to keep from sliding sideways. For 3 days, she had traveled west. 3 days of dust. 3 days of cold mornings and cramped legs. 3 days of wondering whether she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Outside the window, Wyoming stretched beneath a pale autumn sky. Dry grass rolled across the hills. Far in the distance, blue-gray mountains stood against the horizon like silent guardians. Nora reached into her worn leather bag and touched the folded letters once more. She did not unfold them. She already knew every word. Daniel Pierce. The man who promised her a home. The man who promised she would never be alone again. The man she had crossed half the country to marry. The stagecoach crested a ridge. The driver called out, "Iron Creek!" Nora's heartbeat quickened. This was it. The beginning of the rest of her life. The coach rolled into the small Wyoming town just before sunset. A few horses stood tied outside the general store. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Men in work coats crossed the muddy street carrying feed sacks and toolboxes. Nothing looked grand. Nothing looked romantic. But it looked real. And real was enough. The coach finally stopped. Passengers climbed down one by one. Nora gathered her bag and stepped onto the ground. A cool breeze brushed against her face. She searched the crowd. No one stepped forward. No one called her name. Then she noticed a tall man standing beside a dark bay horse near the edge of the street. He wore a brown hat pulled low over his eyes. His coat looked weathered from years of ranch work. Broad shoulders, quiet posture, the kind of man who seemed to belong to the land itself. He walked toward her. Nora straightened. "Mr. Pierce?" she asked. The man frowned slightly. "No, ma'am." He removed his hat. "Garrett Walker." The smile vanished from Nora's face. For a moment neither spoke. "I think there must be some mistake," she said carefully. Garrett glanced toward the driver. The driver unfolded a paper from his pocket. He studied it, then pointed toward Nora. "Miss Nora Hayes?" "Yes." "Silver Pine Ranch," the driver said. "Says right here." Garrett looked just as confused as she felt. "Silver Pine is my ranch." Nora stared at him. "That can't be right?" She pulled out one of Daniel's letters. "My husband-to-be is Daniel Pierce." Garrett shook his head slowly. "Never heard the name." The words hit harder than she expected. "What do you mean you've never heard it?" "I mean exactly that." The driver climbed back onto the coach seat. Nora turned sharply. "Wait, there has to be another ranch." "Not on my route," he said. "You can't leave me here. Manifest says Silver Pine Ranch." The horses started moving. "Sir!" But the stagecoach was already rolling away. Dust rose behind the wheels. Within seconds, it disappeared around the bend. Silence settled over the street. Nora stood frozen. One suitcase. $3. No horse. No family. No Daniel Pierce. Only a stranger watching her with a troubled expression. Garrett rubbed the back of his neck. "Well." The single word sounded tired, not annoyed, not cruel, just tired. Nora swallowed hard. "I don't know what to do." Neither did he. That much was obvious. The evening light faded behind the mountains. Shadows stretched across Iron Creek. Finally, Garrett sighed. You can't stay out here. I don't want charity. Good, because I'm not offering charity. His gaze shifted toward the darkening sky. Just a room for the night until we figure out what happened. Nora hesitated. Every lesson she had ever learned warned against trusting strangers, but every lesson also required having options. She had none. The ride to Silver Pine Ranch took nearly an hour. The road wound through cottonwoods and open pasture. The mountains looked closer now. Their peaks glowed gold beneath the setting sun. Neither spoke much. Garrett seemed like a man who spent most of his days alone. Nora seemed afraid that if she spoke too much, her voice might break. At last, a large wooden ranch house appeared among the pines. A lantern burned beside the porch. The place looked sturdy, well cared for, lived in, but strangely quiet. Garrett carried her suitcase inside. The smell of coffee and firewood filled the air. This room is yours, he said. Thank you. He nodded once. Breakfast at 6. Then he disappeared down the hallway. Nora sat alone on the edge of the bed. The room was simple. A quilt, a wash basin, a wooden chair. Nothing more. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything. The letters, the journey, the mistake, the uncertainty. Sleep refused to come. Near midnight, she stepped into the hallway. Moonlight spilled through a nearby window. As she walked quietly toward the kitchen for water, she noticed a door standing slightly open. Inside was a child's room. A tiny rocking horse sat beside the wall. Books rested neatly on a shelf. A small blanket lay folded across the bed. Everything was perfectly arranged, as if no one had touched it in years. Nora stood in the doorway. The room felt less like a bedroom and more like a memory someone couldn't bear to disturb. Then she noticed a framed photograph on the dresser. A younger Garrett, a smiling woman beside him, and a little girl between them. For a long moment, Nora simply looked. The lonely ranch, the silent hallways, the tired eyes. Suddenly she understood. Whatever pain had brought her to Wyoming was not the only sorrow living under this roof. She quietly closed the door. Back in her room, she lay awake listening to the wind move through the pine trees outside. Tomorrow she would have to find answers. Tomorrow she would have to discover who Daniel Pierce really was. But tonight, one truth stayed with her. The stranger who had opened his door carried wounds he never spoke about. And somehow, against all reason, Nora suspected her story and his had only just begun. Morning came gray and cold over Silver Pine Ranch. Nora woke to the sound of a stove door closing and boots crossing the kitchen floor. For one still moment, she forgot the stagecoach, the wrong name, the dust rising as it left her behind. Then she saw her suitcase by the chair and remembered everything. She washed at the basin, pinned her hair neatly, and stepped into the main room. Garrett stood near the stove, pouring coffee into a tin cup. He had already dressed for work, coat buttoned, hat resting on the table beside a pair of worn leather gloves. "Morning," he said. "Good morning." He set a plate down for her. Biscuits, fried potatoes, a strip of bacon. "You didn't have to feed me." Garrett glanced at her, then looked back at the stove. "Folks eat under my roof." Before Nora could answer, a small voice came from the hallway. "Is she still here?" Nora turned. A little girl stood barefoot in the doorway, holding a rag doll by one arm. Her hair was dark and tangled from sleep. Her eyes, wide and steady, fixed on Nora as if she had found something strange left by the wind. Garrett's voice softened. "Sadie, this is Miss Nora Hayes." Sadie stepped closer. "Are you the lady from the coach?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Were you lost?" Nora looked at Garrett for half a breath. I suppose I was. Sadie nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Papa finds lost calves. Sometimes they cry all night. Garrett cleared his throat and reached for his hat. I'll ride the south fence after breakfast. Hank's coming by. I'll ask him to check in town about that Pierce name. Nora folded her hands. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Garrett is fine. The words were plain, but he left quickly after saying them. When the door shut, the house fell quiet again. Sadie climbed into a chair across from Nora and placed the rag doll on the table. Her arm's loose, she said. Nora looked at the doll. One sleeve had torn near the shoulder. I can mend that. Sadie's face changed, just a little. You know how? I know a thing or two about needles. By noon, Nora had found a small sewing basket in the pantry, its lid dusty and its thread tangled. She sat by the window with Sadie beside her, sunlight catching on the needle as it popped in and out of faded cloth. Sadie watched every stitch. My mama used to sew. Nora's hand paused. She must have been good at it. She made curtains with blue flowers. Nora glanced toward the kitchen window. The old curtains there were yellowed with age, but faint blue flowers still showed along the hem. She had careful hands, Nora said. Sadie looked at her then, not smiling, not sad, just listening. That afternoon, Nora helped sweep the kitchen. She did not ask. She simply found the broom leaning near the back door and began. Dust lifted in soft gray lines across the floorboards. Sadie followed her from room to room, sometimes talking, sometimes just carrying the rag doll against her chest. When Garrett came in at dusk, he stopped near the door. The kitchen table had been cleared. A pot of beans simmered on the stove. Sadie sat on a stool while Nora braided her hair into two neat plaits tied with strips of blue cloth. For a moment, Garrett did not move. Sadie turned her head. Look, Papa, Miss Nora made them even. I see that. His voice came low. Nora's fingers hesitated at the ribbon. I hope you don't mind. Garrett shook his head. No. He hung his hat slowly on the peg. I don't mind. Supper passed with small sounds, spoons against bowls, fire snapping in the hearth, Sadie asking questions about St. Louis, about trains, about whether buildings there touched the sky. Nora answered what she could. Garrett said little, but he listened. Once, when Sadie laughed at Nora's story about a goat wandering into a church supper, Garrett looked up fast. The sound seemed to strike him unprepared. He looked at his daughter, then at Nora, then down at his coffee. Later, while Sadie washed her hands, Nora carried a stack of folded linen to the storage room. The door stuck at first. When she pushed it open, the smell of cedar and old lavender met her. Inside were boxes, a broken lamp, a child's winter coat hanging from a peg, and a trunk pushed beneath the shelf. The lid was not locked. Nora should have left it alone, but a folded quilt had slipped halfway out, dragging a small white bonnet with it. She bent to tuck it back and saw more things inside. A woman's shawl, a pair of gloves, a hairbrush with pale strands caught in the bristles. Nothing had been thrown away. Nothing had been moved. Garrett stood in the doorway before she heard him. Nora turned quickly. I'm sorry. I was only putting the linens away. His eyes went to the trunk. For a long moment, the room held no sound but the wind tapping a loose shutter. My wife's things, he said. Nora lowered her gaze. I didn't mean to pry. I know. He stepped in, took the bonnet gently, and placed it back inside the trunk. His hand remained there a second too long. Then he closed the lid. She's been gone 4 years, he said. Nora did not answer. There was nothing useful to say. Garrett looked at the floor, then toward the hallway where Sadie was humming softly to her doll. She doesn't remember her voice anymore. The words came rough, as if they had scraped their way out. Nora's throat tightened, but she only nodded. That must be hard on both of you. Garrett gave a faint, tired breath. Harder on her? He left the room first. That night, rain came down over Silver Pine Ranch. It tapped the roof, ran from the eaves, and turned the yard dark and shining beneath the porch lantern. Nora lay awake in the guest room, listening. Sometime after midnight, a small cry broke through the rain. Then quick footsteps. Her door opened without a knock. Sadie stood there, face pale, doll clutched tight. Miss Nora? Nora sat up at once. What is it? Sadie's lip trembled. I heard Mama calling, but when I woke up, I couldn't remember how she sounded. Nora moved the blanket aside. Come here. Sadie crossed the room and climbed into her arms as if she had been holding herself together all day and could not do it one moment longer. Nora wrapped the quilt around them both. She did not tell the child not to cry. She did not tell her it was only a dream. She only held her and rocked slowly while the rain worked at the windows. After a while, Sadie's breathing softened. Her small hand stayed curled in Nora's sleeve. Near dawn, Garrett appeared at the open door. He wore his work shirt and suspenders as if he had dressed in a hurry. His hair was mussed. His eyes found Sadie asleep against Nora's shoulder. He stood there, one hand on the doorframe, silent. Nora looked up at him, afraid she had crossed some line she had not seen. Garrett's mouth opened once, but no words came. Then he nodded, a small, broken kind of nod, and stepped back into the hallway. Nora looked down at Sadie. The child slept peacefully for the first time since Nora had entered that house. Outside, the rain began to slow, and somewhere in the quiet rooms of Silver Pine Ranch, something that had been shut away for years moved softly, like a door opening just an inch. The next morning arrived clear and cold. Water still dripped from the porch roof. The mountains wore a thin veil of mist, and frost clung to the fence rails behind the barn. Nora stepped outside carrying a bucket of feed. She paused when she saw Garrett repairing a broken gate near the corral. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he nodded toward the bucket. You don't have to do that. I know. That seemed to surprise him. Nora continued walking. I just don't like standing around while other people work. The corner of Garrett's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. Sadie appeared moments later, running across the yard with one boot half untied. Miss Nora? Nora laughed. Your shoe? I know. Then why are you running? Because I forgot. The child nearly tripped over a chicken before reaching her. Garrett watched them from across the yard. His hammer stopped moving for a second. Then he looked away and returned to work. Days passed, then another week. No word came about Daniel Pierce. Garrett rode into Iron Creek twice. Hank Mercer asked ranchers throughout the valley. Nobody knew the name. Nobody had heard of a Sunrise Valley ranch. Every answer led nowhere. Nora stopped unfolding the letters. She still carried them, but she no longer read them. One afternoon, Garrett returned from town, carrying a folded receipt and a sack of coffee beans. His expression looked darker than usual. What happened? Nora asked. He removed his gloves slowly. Nothing useful. No Daniel. No ranch. No answers. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Because now both of them understood something. The mistake wasn't being fixed. At least not anytime soon. That Sunday they attended church in Iron Creek. The white wooden building sat near the center of town, beside the general store and blacksmith. People greeted Garrett warmly. Many greeted Sadie. Few greeted Nora. She noticed the looks, not cruel, not friendly, curious, measuring, whispering. Reverend Thomas Bell welcomed everyone inside. The service passed quietly, but after the final hymn, Nora felt the room change. People gathered in small circles, conversations lowered when she walked past. Eyes followed her. Near the church steps stood Edith Holloway. She wore a dark green dress trimmed with lace and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to being listened to. She smiled when Garrett approached. "Garrett?" "Edith." Her eyes moved to Nora. The smile stayed, but something colder appeared behind it. "So, this is the woman everyone's talking about." Nora offered a polite nod. Edith returned it. "Barely. I hear she arrived with wedding plans." Garrett's jaw tightened. "There was a misunderstanding." Edith looked at Nora again. "A rather convenient misunderstanding." The words floated lightly, but they landed hard. Nora felt it. Garrett felt it too. "That's enough," he said. Edith blinked. Only once. Then smiled again. "Of course." She walked away. The conversation ended. The rumor did not. Within days it spread across Iron Creek. The woman from the stagecoach. The bride who arrived at the wrong ranch. The stranger staying with Garrett Walker. Every version grew larger than the last. Some claimed she planned to marry him. Others claimed she was hiding something. Nora heard none of it directly. She heard it in pauses, in lowered voices, in doors closing just a little faster than normal. One afternoon, she entered the general store to buy thread. The women near the flour sacks stopped talking. A young clerk suddenly found great interest in arranging nails. Nobody said anything rude. Nobody needed to. When Nora returned to Silver Pine Ranch, she sat quietly on the porch steps. The spool of blue thread rested beside her. Garrett came back from checking cattle. He tied his horse to the rail. "You all right?" "Fine." He looked at her for a moment. "You don't have to pretend." Nora stared across the pasture. The wind moved through the grass. "They don't know me." "No. And they already decided who I am." Garrett sat on the step beside her. Not close, just nearby. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Garrett said quietly, "I know something about that." Nora turned toward him. He never explained. He didn't have to. The words felt honest enough on their own. A few nights later, trouble arrived. Hank pounded on the front door well after dark. Garrett opened it immediately. "Hank?" "The north stable." The two men grabbed lanterns and rushed outside. Nora followed. The cold night air smelled of horses and wet hay. Inside the stable, one of the geldings kicked nervously against its stall. A section of latch had been broken. Feed bags lay scattered across the floor. Garrett moved quickly toward the horse. "Easy." The animal settled. Barely. Hank lifted his lantern. His face hardened. "Somebody did this." Garrett examined the damaged wood. The break looked deliberate. Not weather, not accident. Deliberate. By morning, the story had already reached town. By afternoon, another version appeared. Then another. Eventually, somebody suggested the stranger might have done it. The woman nobody knew. The woman who shouldn't have been there. The woman living under Garrett Walker's roof. Nora heard the accusation while standing outside the mercantile. A man stopped speaking the moment she approached. Another looked away. That was enough. She understood. The walk home felt longer than usual. When she reached Silver Pine Ranch, Garrett was waiting near the barn. "Hank told me." Nora stared at the ground. "Maybe I should leave." The words came quietly. Garrett's head lifted immediately. "No." "Garrett, no." His voice carried more force than either expected. They stood looking at each other. The wind moved through the pine trees. Finally, he spoke again. Lower this time. Running won't make them right. Nora swallowed. Neither moved. Neither looked away. Before either could say more, a sharp voice rang out across town 2 days later. It belonged to Sadie. The child stood near the churchyard while several adults spoke nearby. Her face was red, her fists clenched, and suddenly she shouted loud enough for half of Iron Creek to hear. "Miss Nora never lies!" The street went silent. Every head turned. Sadie's small chest rose and fell. "You don't even know her!" Nobody answered. Not immediately. Garrett stepped forward. For one brief moment he looked at Nora, then at his daughter, and something settled inside him. A realization he could no longer ignore. He wasn't protecting a stranded traveler anymore. He wasn't helping a guest. Somewhere between shared meals, quiet evenings, and a little girl's laughter returning to an empty house, Nora Hayes had become part of Silver Pine Ranch, whether the town liked it or not. And for the first time, Garrett Walker found himself wondering what would happen if she ever left. Winter announced itself early that year. The mornings arrived colder. Frost coated the pasture grass. Thin sheets of ice formed along the edges of watering troughs before sunrise. Life at Silver Pine Ranch settled into a quiet rhythm. Nora rose before dawn. She started coffee, packed Garrett's lunch tin, helped Sadie button her coat before lessons. The work felt natural now, almost dangerous in how natural it felt, because every day made leaving harder. One gray afternoon, a rider appeared at the front gate. Garrett saw him first. The man carried a leather satchel across his shoulder and rode a tired bay horse dusted with road dirt. By the time he reached the porch, Nora and Sadie had stepped outside. The stranger removed his hat. "Garrett Walker?" "That's right. My name's Caleb Finch." Something changed in Garrett's expression. "From Cheyenne?" Caleb nodded. "I've got information about Daniel Pierce." The world seemed to stop. Nora felt her fingers tighten around the porch railing. For weeks she had imagined this moment. For weeks she had hoped and feared. Inside, Caleb opened his satchel. He removed several folded documents, receipts, and copies of agency records. The papers spread across the kitchen table beneath the lamp. Garrett read first, then again, more slowly. Finally, he pushed the documents toward Nora. She looked down. At first, the words made little sense. Agency filings, false names, fake correspondence, forged contracts. Then she saw it. Daniel Pierce. Beside the name was a note written by an investigator. Identity fictitious. Never existed. Nora stared at the line. Again. And again. The letters she had carried across half the country suddenly felt heavier than stone. Caleb spoke carefully. "You weren't the only one." Nobody interrupted. The agency clerk created several false identities, promised marriages, collected fees, disappeared before anyone discovered the fraud. Sadie looked confused. Garrett looked angry. Nora looked at nothing. "All this time," she whispered. Her voice barely carried. "All this time there was nobody waiting." The room fell silent. Even the fire seemed quieter. Caleb remained for supper, then left before dark. His horse disappeared into the fading light beyond the cottonwoods. Afterward, Garrett found Nora sitting alone on the porch. The oil lamp beside her burned low. She had one of the letters in her lap, not reading it, simply holding it. Garrett sat beside her. For several minutes, neither spoke. The mountains stood black against the sky. A coyote called somewhere far away. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Nora smiled faintly. Not because anything was funny, because there was nothing else to do. You didn't write them. No. You didn't lie. No. She nodded. The wind moved a loose strand of hair across her cheek. Then there's nothing for you to apologize for. Garrett looked toward the dark pasture. His hands rested quietly on his knees. Still feels like somebody should. Nora lowered her eyes. The letter remained folded in her lap. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she stopped imagining another future. No Daniel, no Sunrise Valley Ranch, no husband waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Nothing. Just the truth. And sometimes the truth was colder than winter. That night, she remained on the porch long after everyone else slept. The oil lamp slowly burned down. The flame grew smaller, smaller, until finally it disappeared. The darkness felt honest. By morning, her decision had been made. She packed her suitcase before sunrise, folded every dress, wrapped her sewing kit, placed the letters at the bottom. Not because she wanted them, because she no longer knew what else to do with them. When Garrett entered the kitchen, he saw the suitcase near the door. His face hardened immediately. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Nora nodded. "I can't stay forever." "You don't have anywhere to go." "That's true." "Then why?" She looked down at her hands. Because saying it out loud hurt. Because this was never supposed to be my home. Garrett stared at her. Neither raised their voice, and that somehow made it worse. "You're not a burden here." "I know." "Then stay." Nora swallowed. The words almost broke her resolve. Almost. But not enough. "I need to find my own way." Garrett looked away first. Sadie stood silently in the hallway. Neither adult realized she had heard every word. The little girl remained there long after the conversation ended, long after Nora carried her suitcase back into the guest room, long after Garrett rode out to check the north pasture. Sadie sat alone on the edge of her bed. Her rag doll rested beside her. Outside the window, clouds gathered over the mountains. The first storm of the season was moving in. By evening, the temperature dropped sharply. Wind rattled the shutters. Snow began falling high in the peaks. Inside the house, everything appeared normal. Supper was served. Dishes were washed. Lamps were lit. Yet something felt wrong. Very wrong. Near midnight, the wind grew stronger. And before dawn, while the ranch still slept beneath the gathering storm, a small figure quietly opened the front door. A child slipped into the darkness. The snow had already begun to fall. And by sunrise, Sadie Walker was gone. Garrett found the front door unlatched. At first, he thought the wind had worried it loose. Then he saw Sadie's small coat missing from the peg and the little red scarf gone from the chair by the stove. "Nora." His voice carried through the house like a struck bell. Nora came from the guest room, still tying her boots. One look at his face told her enough. They searched the house first, then the barn, then the hayloft, the chicken shed, and the old wash house behind the kitchen. Nothing. Near the front steps, Nora crouched in the snow. Small boot prints crossed the yard toward the north pasture. Garrett stared at them. His hand tightened around the fence rail until his knuckles paled. "She heard us," Nora whispered. He did not answer. He ran to the barn. Within minutes, 2 horses were saddled. Hank Mercer arrived just as the wind sharpened, riding in from the lower range with frost on his mustache. Garrett pointed toward the ridge. "She went north." Hank's face changed. "Storm's coming down hard from the peaks." "I know." Nora stepped beside Garrett, pulling her coat tight. "I'm coming." Garrett turned. "Nora, she ran because of me. She ran because she was scared. And she'll listen if she hears my voice." That ended it. They rode out beneath a sky the color of iron. Snow swept across the pasture in thin white sheets. The tracks held for a while, so small and uneven beside the old wagon trail. Then the wind began to fill them in. Garrett rode ahead, eyes fixed on the ground. Nora kept calling Sadie's name, again, again, until her throat burned. They reached the line of pines below the ridge near noon. The world had grown quiet in the way only heavy snow could make it quiet. Even the horses seemed afraid to breathe too loud. Then Nora saw it, a strip of red caught on a low branch. Sadie's scarf. Garrett pulled it free and pressed it once in his fist. She came this way. Hank pointed toward the slope. There's an old hunting cabin past Miller's Draw. Garrett swung back into the saddle. They found the cabin after what felt like hours. It sat crooked beneath the trees, half buried in snow, its roof sagging under white weight. Garrett reached the door first. "Sadie!" No answer. He shoved it open. The room inside was dark and cold. Then Nora heard a small sound from behind a stack of old feed sacks. A cough. She dropped to her knees. "Sadie?" The child was curled beneath a torn horse blanket, cheeks pale, lashes wet with melted snow. Nora gathered her carefully. Sadie's eyes opened halfway. "I didn't want you to go." Nora held her tighter. "I'm here." Sadie's small hands clung to her coat. "If you leave, I'll lose my mama twice." Garrett turned away for 1 second. Only one. But Nora saw his shoulders shake before he faced them again. He knelt beside them and placed his coat over Sadie. "We're going home, little bird." The ride back was slow. Hank led the way with a lantern. Garrett rode close beside Nora, one hand steadying Sadie where she rested against Nora's chest. Snow gathered on all three of them, but nobody complained. By the time they reached Silver Pine, Martha Reed had already come. She examined Sadie by the stove, wrapped her feet in warm cloths, and ordered broth, dry blankets, and no foolish talking. Sadie slept by evening. Nora sat beside the bed until the lamp burned low. Garrett stood in the doorway. "I thought I'd lost her." Nora looked down at Sadie's hand resting in hers. "So did I." He stepped closer. "And then I thought I'd lose you too." The words stayed between them. Quiet, plain, too true to take back. 2 days later, the truth about the stable came out. Hank found a brass button near the broken latch, the same kind sewn on the dark green riding coat Edith Holloway wore to church. A hired boy from town finally admitted Edith had paid him to frighten Garrett's horses and leave signs that would point toward Nora. Iron Creek did not apologize all at once. Towns rarely did. But people stopped whispering when Nora entered the mercantile. Reverend Bell tipped his hat to her outside the chapel. Martha Reed brought over apple preserves and stayed for coffee. Edith left town before the first hard freeze. A few weeks later, Garrett took Nora up the hill behind the ranch house. The snow had melted in patches. Brown grass showed beneath. A wooden cross stood beneath a pine tree, weathered but cared for. Garrett removed his hat. Nora stood quietly beside him. For a long while he said nothing. Then he breathed out slowly. "I kept thinking loving someone new meant leaving her behind." The wind moved softly through the branches. "But I think maybe grief isn't a house a man has to live in forever." Nora looked at him. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small ring, plain gold, worn smooth with years. "My mother's," he said. His hand trembled only a little. "Home stopped feeling empty when you walked through that door." Nora's eyes filled. Garrett swallowed. "I'm asking you to stay. Not because you were sent here. Not because you have nowhere else. Because this place is better with you in it." Nora looked down at the ring, then toward the ranch below, where smoke rose from the chimney, and Sadie's laughter drifted faintly from the yard. "Yes," she whispered. Spring came late to the Absaroka foothills. But it came. They were married beneath the open sky beside Silver Pine Creek. Sadie carried wildflowers in both hands and dropped more than she meant to along the path. Hank stood with his hat in his hands. Martha cried into a handkerchief. Reverend Bell spoke gently, as if the whole valley had grown quiet to hear him. When the vows were done, Sadie ran straight into Nora's arms. "Now you're really my mama." Nora knelt and held her close. "If you'll have me." Sadie squeezed tighter. "I already did." Garrett took Nora's hand. No one corrected the child. No one looked away. And when the wind moved over Silver Pine Ranch that evening, it no longer sounded lonely. Nora Hayes had come west for a man who never existed. She had been delivered by mistake to a ranch that had forgotten how to laugh. But sometimes the wrong road knows more than the traveler. Sometimes a broken plan carries a person straight to grace. And beneath the wide Wyoming sky, with Garrett's hand around hers and Sadie leaning against her side, Nora finally understood. She had not been abandoned at the wrong door. She had been brought home. And maybe that's why this story stays with us long after the last sunset fades over Silver Pine Ranch. Because if you place yourself where Nora once stood, alone, carrying everything you owned in a single suitcase, believing your future had vanished with a lie, you can almost feel how easy it would have been to give up. Easy to believe that one wrong turn had ruined everything. But life has a strange way of writing roads we never would have chosen for ourselves. Nora went west, searching for a husband. What she found was something far greater. A child who needed her. A man who learned how to open his heart again. A place where her presence mattered. Maybe the lesson isn't that every ending becomes happy. Maybe it's that healing often arrives quietly. Not through grand promises or perfect plans, but through shared meals, small acts of kindness, and the people who choose to stay when they have every reason to leave. If this story touched you, I'd love to know. What moment stayed with you the most? And if you enjoy stories about second chances, family, courage, and the unexpected ways people find where they belong, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting beyond the next trail. Stories filled with heartache, hope, mystery, and the kind of love that leaves a mark long after the final page. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never underestimate where an unexpected road might lead.